Hello, Steve.
Hello, Joe.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to, I guess this is the very first episode of our new podcast, Deliver That, which is, we're just kicking it off. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what the podcast is about, as well as going into the main subject of it. So we're going to start off just describing what the podcast is. It's about delivery leadership, about big concepts. It's going to be about real life stories, but in particular, it's going to be about the role and everything involved in being a chief delivery officer. And so that's going to be the main subject of the conversation today. But before we do that, we kind of thought we'd be sensible to talk about the reasons behind it, why we're doing it. Steve, I asked you last week before, a few weeks ago anyway, whether this might be a good idea, and you said, "Yeah, I think it might work." What was it that you kind of connected with?
I think once you finally convinced us, I think it was because realised that actually we've got a lot to share. I think that it's very easy to kind of think, "Oh, I've just done the same as everybody else. There's nothing new to share." But actually, when you start talking through the experience that you've had, the scars that you've earned along the way, you realise actually there's probably quite a lot in that that we can share, that we can sort of just have a chat about. And then later on, when we can bring in a few guests to come and join and have similar discussions as well. I think, there's a pretty broad range of projects that we can talk through in terms of the what went well, what didn't go quite so well, and, stripes that we've earned from that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of what I felt as well as we were proposing it to each other, working it through in our minds, was that sense that, we've got a lot of experience. And there's, we'll talk about this in just a sec, but Steve and I worked together for a while, and then we spent quite a while not working together, working in other places. And I know that I got lots that I want to hear about from Steve, lots I can learn about from you, Steve. And, hear about some of those stories and things that we did do together, things we can reminisce about, things that we didn't do together and we can learn from and we can laugh about because we've messed it up and then made it better again. And I hope as well that the point of doing it as a podcast is that we're sharing that learning outside of our four walls as well to those who listen in. Essentially, I guess we're just geeking out together about delivery leadership. We're enjoying the subject, feeling happy with it, and enjoying what we do for work, and then talking in depth about it.
Yeah, and this is not something, we've not scripted this. This is just sort of off the cuff, sort of just going to be bouncing ideas and experiences with each other as well, and just sort of see what comes from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you can see it's not scripted because we're talking over each other already. But also, I really hope that one of the outcomes of this is a benefit for each other and for those listening in, that we can then do better stuff in our own working lives by learning from each other, by talking things through together, talking about the things that we have learned, through doing them right and through doing them wrong and through fixing things up. We can take that back to our daily working life together, or separately as well. So with all of that in store, Steve, maybe it's worth just you giving a kind of a 1 minute thumbnail of who you are, your history, your working history, and how you've come to this place, as it were.
Yeah, I'll probably keep it even shorter than that. But so I've worked as a delivery. I mean, initially I started off as a developer, done that for about 10 years, and then eventually I got into project management, and then later delivery management. Worked my way through to head of delivery. I've done a couple of those roles. I've also acted as a COO, Chief Operating Officer as well, which I was when we worked together, Joe. So I know what having a good CDO looks like. And although I've not held a CDO position, I have been in similar positions, setting that strategy and selling everything to the team itself and sort of, everything that it entails being a CDO as well. So I've got quite a lot of projects under my belt at lower levels and at higher levels for some big and small organizations. So, there's plenty to pick through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and which I'm really looking forward to myself because I know there's loads of your history that I don't know about. So, and we're
Yeah.
definitely going to pick those stories up as we go.
And similarly, Joe, you?
Yeah, well, very like you, Steve. I've got a very long career history. I was thinking back, I started back in the dot-com bubble, way back in the late 90s, early 2000s. It shows how old I am, for one. But I've been working in tech in one capacity or another since then, largely as an engineer, developer. So I guess that's one of the similarities. The reason why we connected is that we've both worked in that digital space, and certainly a lot of what we talk about will be digital project delivery. But I hope as the podcast goes on, we'll broaden that. But our immediate connection is through digital projects. I started out as an engineer, worked in agencies and multinational organizations. And then, Steve, you and I met when we were working for a large European digital agency in the UK team, and we worked on some really big government delivery digital transformation projects, really. I was leading the technical side, you were leading the delivery side and operations, and that's our kind of strongest connection. And certainly for me, that's the place where my delivery management experience, expertise really was honed. That's the cauldron of it all for me.
Yeah, I think because we learned a lot at that time, didn't we? Because that was the time when we had just started up the UK office of that European company, and we'd started from scratch.
Yeah,
So there was a lot of work involved as well in sort of bringing the rest of that organization together, so that we could be sort of borrowing skills and experience from around that group,
yeah,
bringing them into the UK, and then sort of servicing what was a pretty big company, pretty big client at the time.
yeah.
Wouldn't have been able to do that had we not been sort of operating at that level.
Yeah, exactly. And then we went our separate ways for various reasons. And I ended up working for an AI startup a good few years ago, kind of the vanguard of almost before really the current movement towards AI usage in digital services. I've been doing that for quite a few years. So, and again, doing that for some large organizations, mainly in regulated industries. But it's made it a really interesting context, sorry, for digital delivery, project delivery. So all of those stories, I think, between us, we're gonna bring to these podcasts over the various episodes.
Yeah.
I thought before we move on to talk about the subject, though, Steve, it might just be good to talk about the plan for these episodes, how the podcast episodes, how they might fit together. So, mostly to begin with, it's going to be you and me talking. We're going to be having conversations of geeking out, like I said, about our work and enjoying learning from each other. But also, we're going to invite some guests on, people from digital project delivery. But hopefully, as we progress, we'll have some guests from wider sectors than that as well. Because although the sectors themselves are different, there's lots of similarities, I think, in the mindset, the approaches, the methodologies, the philosophy as well, also of delivering big stuff in all kinds of different industries. So there's loads to learn from as we talk to guests from wider sectors. We've got a rough outline of what we'll talk about, but we're going to be fairly broad and loose with that. And we're going to see how the conversations go. And I guess inevitably, as we chat, we'll find things that we want to dive into in more detail. We're aiming for about 40 minutes ish for most episodes, I think. And Steve, that seems to make sense because that's about the time it takes for someone to do a commute or walk around the park or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. I think we could go into a lot more detail, but we need to just sort of keep this to we need to make make some real sort of good, clear, strong points, I think, within a 40-minute podcast, and not sort of drag it out. Otherwise, I think we're just going to kind of dilute that conversation. So yeah, 40 minutes there or thereabouts, and hopefully we've got plenty to share in that time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then I just wanted to say that we've got the domain deliverthatpodcast.com. If you go there, you'll find there's a form on there. If you want to ask us a question or want to prompt or respond to something we've said, then use that to get in contact, and we'll pick that up whenever we can for each of our conversations. Cool. I think that
Okay.
sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Is this where we get into the meat of the conversation?
Should we do that? Should we do just that?
Why the hell not?
So the first episode, this episode today, we thought we'd tackle that the main subject. We're calling this thing a podcast for chief delivery officers, but we're kind of aware as we've been preparing and getting our minds around the subject that it's an unusual term, and we thought, well, maybe the best thing to do with this episode today is to talk about that. Why we're talking about chief delivery officers rather than other positions in the world of project delivery, project management, and what difference it makes having that language, chief delivery officer, rather than some of the other more common terms which we've experienced in various parts of our careers. So that's going to be the main subject of our conversation during this episode, and then we'll see where it goes and follow on from there. So, Steve, when I came to you and talked to you about this a few weeks ago and mentioned that term, you said it was a relatively new term even to you.
Yeah, I think depending on the organization that you're in, you know, whether you're a CDO, whether you're a head of, whether you're a principal, something, I think they can all mean different things in different organizations. But for me, the CDO, having sort of spent a bit of time thinking about it, it's somebody above that head of, above that principal, and you're operating more at the kind of the operational. You're operating at the sort of business level within the organization, sort of in line with a sort of business strategy. That's the height that you're at there. Um, you are a single point of accountability as well for delivery. Um, and I think this the CDO typically has, they've got an eye on the business. They've also got an eye on delivery and on the client. Um,
Yeah, so I
what
think
they
it's
are.
kind of sorry, you carry on.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say I think it's people will be more familiar with language like delivery manager or labels like delivery manager, project manager, senior project manager as you go up through the pile. As you said, we've had heads of roles and various other things, VP and so on. Um, but chief delivery officer means something different, and it stands out
Yeah,
from all those other roles. I think what's obvious really is that the other roles generally would report to somebody else, somebody who isn't delivery specific, like a COO. You said you were COO in a previous role. And in delivery managers would report to you as
yeah,
COO, but the COO has a much broader remit. And clearly, because it's an operation of the business, it makes sense in to some degree. But by using the term chief delivery officer, we're trying to separate that out and say maybe this actually should be viewed as that kind of executive level role, someone who sits amongst the other C-suite, as they call it, the other chiefs of
yeah,
chief officers, which is yeah, it's a novel set of language. Um,
yeah. You've got a different authority and responsibility at that level compared to something like a head of. A head of is responsible for kind of the day-to-day delivery, and it's quite a senior position, but you are not at the C level at all. You're reporting into the C level. The C level have got a business objective, they've got a strategy there, and what you are doing is just a part of what feeds that objective. You're feeding into that bigger picture. And
mm,
as a head of, you don't have quite that same helicopter view that a
mm.
CDO would have. The CDO is very much has that sort of highest view and is looking down pretty much on the whole business. Um, so yeah, I think there is quite a distinction between the two roles. Having sort of sat in both over the
What's been
years.
your experience of being a head of in your various roles in the past, and how that felt to you in terms of, I mean, you have a lot of responsibilities as a head of department,
Mhm.
but you're not, sitting at that, what do they call it? The room where things get done, or the room where things happen. You're not part of
Yeah,
that conversation
no, no,
and
you're
you're
not.
reporting into it. So what difference do you think, what's your experience of being the head of?
Well, I mean, where I've worked in the past, I've not been the only head of. There's been a head of various departments, and you're feeding into, you don't always interact with all those other departments. So where I'm sitting in delivery, there might be somebody in fraud, or there might be in someone in project management or in engineering. Now, I don't touch each of those departments all the time, but somebody has to be looking down because all of those are feeding into something. Um, so yeah, I could quite often spend days and weeks even just within my little bubble as a head of, and I'm not really concerned about everybody else, but somebody else has to be concerned with all of those other heads of and directing all of them towards a common goal.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? It's the common goal. The C level squad are
Yeah,
bringing all those specialisms. You've got the chief executive officer, obviously, and the chief financial officer, and the chief operations officer, and the chief marketing officer, and all the rest of those C level roles who are working together with their separate specialisms, but all their accumulated wisdom and bringing them together in order to work out how do we achieve those goals for the business as a whole, and how do we overcome the challenges, the difficulties, those kind of things that crop up. How do we do that using all of this, pooling all this capability and knowledge together? And so there's that kind of one teamness at the top level. Whereas I think you're completely right. There's a almost a siloed nature as a head of, or even a kind of what I know language is sometimes weird, but like often director of is not considered to be an executive level role. The chief of is generally that.
yeah,
And it's that which I think is particularly interesting in talking about delivery leadership by calling it chief delivery officer rather than delivery principal or so on. You're just changing the shape of the conversation. And I know I'm going to go off on one now, but I've described this to you, Steve. The thing that I think's really important about it is that when the business has a very strong component that is looking to customers, especially, I mean, many of the businesses you and I have been in are largely service delivery businesses. They're from the knowledge industry in effect, where the client experience is kind of central to what you're doing. Then that service delivery, that how you do it, is the thing that clients experience most closely for themselves. Clients
yeah. I
have
think
that. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, yeah, I think more often than not, delivery is the product. So it's all
Yes,
about kind
yes,
of execution excellence, to drive the growth, to sort of manage that client retention and the profitability that comes with it as well. Um,
yes. That's a lovely
and I
phrase. I
think,
really like that. Delivery is the product. Yes.
yeah, it is. And it's the CDO's job to make sure that the company meets those promises that you've made to the client as well. And obviously that's all about strengthening those relationships with the client, which then allows your organization to grow as well.
Yeah, and I think that's even true for product businesses. My last role, major role, was in a SaaS product business where the professional services unit was a wrap around the product. And so you could completely use the product. It was designed to be a SaaS tool. You could use it off the shelf and bumble your way through. And there's lots of documentation, and loads of people will know how to, and have loads of experience of doing that, will know of doing that for themselves. But we as a company offered this professional services wraparound as a way of giving a power up, essentially, to using the product in the most um, uh, productive way, getting the best out of it. Really using it as a for high performance kind of stuff. And so even for product businesses, I think delivery management, effective delivery leadership, really ought to be at the core of the business, and also needs to be a C-level role there. I think the other thing which for me then, or kind of follows on from that, is that because delivery, as you said, is the product, it forms something of the foundation of the reputation of the company. If that's how clients come into the business, or what they experience most of the business, other than maybe the marketing aspect, I guess, then what you do in that delivery is part of the character of the business.
Yeah, totally. And that I think that certain roles I've been in, I mean, sort of as a COO, I was, joined as a COO. It was quite a small organization at the time, but that was kind of still the role I was carrying out. The first thing that we focused on was just how are we going to deliver? We didn't start delivering projects straight away. The first step was like, imagine a project comes in. What's the first step? What's going to be the second step? And how are you going to take that project from the initial brief through to delivery? And that there's an awful lot of things to consider along the way, and all of that is about delivery excellence, and what's going to make your product, your way of delivering, you, how are you going to make that stand out? What is what keeps clients awake at night? What does a
Mm.
client
Yeah.
want to focus on? What's important to them? And I think you need to be thinking ahead about all those questions that clients are likely to ask based on the experiences that you've had from previous projects as well. And you can bake those all into your kind of way of working. And quite often, more often than not, you end up with a way of working. Um, and you've just then got to, but that's kind of your day one operational guide. But I think you need to be people always talk about continuous improvement. And I
Mm.
think that's something else
Mm.
that you've always got to bake into that as well, because you're going to be talking to clients as the CDO, what's working for the client, what's not working for the client. And then you as a
Yeah.
CDO have got to feed that back into the team and say, okay, this is not working, or you're
Yeah.
particularly
Yeah.
strong in this area, not in that area. How can we then sort of polish that a bit more?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that the dimension in which the clients perceive you as the company. I had a conversation with the chief exec of an enterprise WordPress agency uh, called XWP, Miles Lago Craig, who the language he used was really interesting. He talked about the your customers or his customers wanting to outsource expertise to their agency, to their business, and so the credibility of the business, showing off the expertise of it, that was part of the client experience that they baked into the core of their business. And he said that that's kind of exactly what the CDO's responsibility is to in tandem definitely with the marketing, the commercial dimension, commercial presentation of your company, is that that client experience is consistent all the way through, so that they
Yeah,
know not only that they perceive that they're going to be in the hand of experts, but they experience being in the hands of experts the whole time. And that, yeah, so that outsourced expertise is the thing that drives you through the whole way. I guess what we're talking about there, and well, we'll come back to building that expertise in a future episode. It definitely feels like that's a big subject to come back to.
yeah,
But what we're really talking about here is the reputation in delivery, that the what you're doing is part of that vibe, that aura of who your business is, and why you might say, to use some big multinational names, why you might go with Accenture versus Capgemini versus PwC. They all have a different personality about their businesses, and there's something about the way that the CDO constructs that delivery experience, and it's then taken on by all the various delivery teams, is the foundation of that reputation for the business. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I guess what we're circling around here is this is the reason why having the CDO as the chief, as a chief delivery officer, having someone in that C-suite is so important, isn't it? It's why by having the CDO alongside the chief exec in particular, understanding those business goals, business objectives, and working out how to translate that into a delivery experience, a coherent delivery experience, sitting really closely with the chief marketing officer, chief revenue officer, and all of those other colleagues, and pooling that together. So
yeah,
yeah, so I think that's really the reason for the podcast.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, just I guess one final thing to say before we take a short break is that's why in this podcast we'll generally be using the term chief delivery officer rather than any of the many other terms that there are, head of project management office or head of delivery or delivery principal or delivery director or whatever. Although loads of what we talk about will cover aspects of delivery management directly, we'll really be talking, I think, more widely about the paramount delivery leadership. That's the heart of what the podcast is, but we'll cover lots of other stuff as well. So on that, we'll take a short break and we'll be back in just a minute to talk in more detail about what a CDO actually does. So, welcome back. We've spent the first section of this episode talking about why we're using this weird title, Chief Delivery Officer. But in the second part, I thought it'd be useful to talk in more depth about the role. Obviously, the whole of this podcast is going to be exploring the role completely and all the various aspects of it, and we're going to plunge into them in great detail as we go over the weeks and over the episodes. But we're going to give a bit of a thumbnail sketch, really, of our combined kind of view of what that role is. Steve, you and I've had many experiences in delivery leadership and at small, medium, and large businesses, and maybe that could be a good place to start. But I just wanted to mention that the place of the CDO is actually slightly funny because it sits in a weird hinterland in between what the customers need and what the business goals are, and it's trying to find a common way forward for those. So as we talk about this experience, small, medium, large businesses, and so on, we'll be exploring that in a bit more depth. But maybe, I mean, Steve, I know you've had quite a few experiences in small, medium, and large businesses of delivery leadership. Could you describe what delivery leadership looks like in a small business and how that differs in a medium business, and what happens when you're moving from a medium business to a large business, kind of maturing the business?
Yeah. So I think within a small business, I mean, that small business might be a startup. If you're involved in the startup as a CDO, for one, like I mentioned, it's quite a grand title to have in a startup, to be a CDO of perhaps half a dozen people.
Yeah,
but
and so you probably have a different title, wouldn't you? In a smaller business, you probably would be called the delivery manager or
yeah, and
delivery
I
leader.
think you also might have a different set of skills as well to what you might have as a CDO in a medium or a large organization as well. But I think ultimately the role that you're playing is still the same. It's just on a smaller scale. So I think you can expect as a CDO in a small organization, a startup, you're rolling your sleeves up, you've got your wellies on, and you're involved in the weeds at that point. You're setting everything up from the ground up. We talked before about sort of operational excellence and delivery being the product. This is a chance for you to start afresh. You haven't sort of inherited any sort of ways of working. So this is your chance to do things right from the beginning, and that's kind of where you start from the
It's
beginning.
interesting you say that. Actually, one of my other conversations with a CEO recently was with Jake Goldman, who's founder for TenUp, which is now the WordPress arm of Fueled, a very large WordPress agency based in North America. He said when he started TenUp all those years ago that a delivery lead was one of his first hires. I think it was person 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere around there. It's one of those things you need to have in really close to the beginning. And as you say, it's at that point you're doing more than just leading the projects. You're also thinking about the progress of how you lead more projects.
Yeah. And this is your chance to get it right from the beginning. You've probably worked in other medium and large organizations before you got here. And this is your sort of chance to get it right, to avoid all the problems that you've had to work with and put up with over the years. This is a chance to sort of for a clean slate. So yeah, I think certainly in my experience as well, you're a CDO, small organization, doesn't matter how many people there are in, there's not going to be many of you. You're involved in the weeds at the beginning, but I think quite early on, you need to have like an exit strategy out of the weeds, because if you stay there for too long, you can't then be a CDO longer term.
Yeah.
You know, a
Yeah.
CDO
Yeah.
can't be involved at the coalface forever.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
important that
Yeah.
you're there, you set the standards, you work with the team, you build the trust. And what you're also doing is you're building a team that you can sort of leave behind that is self-managed, and they can sort of take over the reins of delivery when you then make your exit and you sort of
Yeah.
you move upstairs into that kind of CEO as the organization
So
gets
you're
bigger.
talking now, I think, more towards the next zone up, the kind of medium-sized business, everything from maybe 30 to 150, something along those kind of
Yeah,
lines. Yeah, it's
yeah,
quite
yeah.
hard to work out quite whether, and I guess it depends on from industry to industry, but something along those kind of lines, where you probably know most faces in the building, most people, what they do, and
Mhm.
you probably have a good conversational relationship with majority. In your experience, how does it change across that threshold?
Yeah, usually by this point, the business is a bit more mature, and delivery becomes more complex. You're delivering bigger projects now for bigger clients. So this is where delivery excellence is paramount to what you're doing. You're operating properly now at that C level. So, you've got teams below you that report into you. Um, and, you're measuring them based on their performance, and their performance then reflects on the business. And it's that reflection on the business. That's what you're kind of interested in. Um, it's going to be you who deals with any problems that are escalated by the client. So you need to be, you're sort of sitting there across all of those delivery teams, if you like. And even in a medium-sized business, that can be quite a lot of teams. So you
Definitely,
need to
yeah.
make sure that those teams are all also working together, supporting each other, improving the ways of working right across the board, and making sure as well that there's consistency across those teams as well. Because if you need to start swapping in and out different people across those teams, perhaps for the same client or different working with different teams within your client as well, you need that consistency. So you've now got quite a big job to do in terms of managing the operational side of the business in a medium-sized organization.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Consistency is one of those phrases that certainly CEOs that I've spoken to that's the goal that they're looking for really in all of this. They want to know that if for any reason you've got to swap out personnel, just as you said, if it's a personality clash or an illness or all kinds of myriad of reasons, holiday, that you're going to get the customer's going to get the same delivery experience all the way
Mhm.
across the board. Certainly, I
You
remember
mentioned some.
Jake Goldman talking about that when I had my conversation with him.
You mentioned a good thing to me just last week about consistency and jazz. So this is
Yes.
like I've in the past I've been very focused on consistency and having a way of working, putting together a framework of this is how we deliver. And it's not a methodology. It's always been a framework for me because I like people to sort of operate within a framework so that they can sort of um, you know you get different people. You like people to be able to showcase their own skills and experience. So I think a framework works best. But at the same time, a framework can also become quite prescriptive in a way. You'll get some people who
Yes.
will just follow the framework. So I think this idea that you have consistency and jazz, and the jazz being the idea that we're constantly changing, we're constantly evolving this thing. This thing is getting better all the time. We're basing it, it's based on empiricism, on sort of getting that feedback from the client
Yeah.
and improving that way. I think I think that is a really important point. That's really kind of stuck with us since you mentioned it, sort of consistency and jazz. I think those two
Yeah.
combine them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is where we're talking about getting towards from through that medium-sized business phase towards a large and robust business phase. I remember Tom Wilmot, CEO of Human Made, also a WordPress agency. I've been having a few chats with WordPress agency leaders recently, but he said they had a phase where they realized they needed to become grown-ups as a business. They needed order and consistency and process and maturity. And they had an excellent delivery principal who brought all of that for them. But the consequence was that delivery kind of in that world, it's very easy for delivery to rule the roost. And then the innovation or I guess the kind of the secret sauce, the distinctive flavor that is your business can get lost amongst the highly productive, high performance processes that a good delivery principal will bring to you.
Is that
But
because the
that
the working environment's wrong? Do you have, is it just you've got the environment set up wrong so that people are, I don't know, people haven't got the opportunity to kind of try new things, or they're scared to fail? Is there a sort of, is there a, do people get blamed if there's failure rather than sort of it being a discussion about, okay, you failed, but what we're going to do differently next time?
it's a really interesting question. I wonder whether sometimes those things are more symptoms rather than causes. Whether that's what you see on the surface level, you see people who are afraid to do this or don't, or maybe get resentment because they're not able to try out that new innovation, or the projects that they are working on become so formulaic that there is no space for creativity. And I wonder whether what you've ended up with is what the problem is, a deeper level issue of which those are surface level manifestations. And by what I mean, what I mean is really that project management has become so powerful, that it's determining everything. Whereas, and Tom Wilmot himself said this, it's really important to see delivery management as a conversation partner with the other parts of the business, which I guess is why we're talking about the CDO role being there in the top tier, that it functions alongside all those other disciplines that you need humming really well to function as business. Everyone's responsible for the business outcomes. And so seeing delivery management, but also delivery leadership as a facilitator of experting, is really where it's important to understand what the position of a CDO is, and that I think is coming back to that phrase "and jazz." By creating the stability, the really solid foundation, amazingly consistent, reliable processes, thoroughgoing tools and toolkits that you just know how to do stuff. It then creates almost a safe space in which someone can say, I reckon the way of approaching this problem for you, customer, is this new thing that I learned about at the conference I was at last month. That's the thing that everyone's talking about, and it seems like that would be the right sledgehammer to crack the nut that you're dealing with, or you're presenting us with. Sorry. So that it's the providing a consistent foundation, a really rock solid environment in which experts can do their expert thing. And so delivery management, rather than being first among equals, is definitely at parity or in harmony with all the other disciplines. Yeah, yeah. I think that's kind of where I would see it, and that's why that phrase has been so powerful. Um, yeah, and jazz. It's great.
Yeah, it's quite a tough one, I think, for the CDO. CDOs trying to work at that level. Like we said before, they're kind of working upstairs, aren't they? But actually, they need to be quite involved at some time, at some point in the day to day, to be on the shop floor, to understand what's going on there, what's
Yeah,
not going on there as well.
yeah, yeah,
I think speaking to individuals, I think you've got to make yourself open and available for individuals to be able to come up and talk to you, so that you can sort of, you get a better a feel for what's going on the ground in that working environment.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I think just the second thing that's really important to say about the CDO role is that you're sitting in a weird place, as we said, between the customer experience or the customer needs and the business objectives. And it's a very odd position to sit in, looking both ways simultaneously. You're aware that the customers bought something, and because they bought something, they should get something that they've paid for, in effect. But at the same time, as we said in the first half, the customer's outsourcing their expertise to you as the business. And so there's a degree to which the old adage, the customer's always right, actually doesn't apply here, because what the customer is really wanting is you as the experts to say what is the right thing. And so that healthy backwards and forwards relationship with the customer is vitally part of what the CDO is trying to achieve, or to at least empower the day-to-day practitioners, the delivery managers and delivery principals, to be able to do with their customers, in the actual projects they're dealing with. Um, and at the same time, the business itself has objectives. The business has got a direction of travel. We were just discussing this a bit this morning, Steve, weren't we? About how important it is if you've got a particular specialism in your business. We're both from digital world, so let's say you're building smartphone apps. If your customer is asking you to do something which is heavily web based, um, then you might want to do that. But you might also want to say, well, actually, that's not where we're going as a business, and we don't want to invest time in that. And it's this is one of the reasons for having, I think, the CDO role with that chief officer title there, is to understand those business objectives, what it is as a unit we're driving towards,
And
and to be able
that's
to
one of the
push back to the client and say, I get what you're talking about, but you need someone else to do that for you.
yeah, and that's an example of where the CDO differentiates from a head of or a principal, because that's
Yes.
obviously that's not, you don't have the authority to be making those decisions. If the customers come in wanting some sort of app, and then all of a sudden once they're through the door they decide that they want something quite different, which is not part of your usual offering, and then I guess it's more for somebody at that C level to make the decision about, is
Yeah.
this just something we're just going to help the client out here because it's part of their sort of big plans for the year, or you might even see it as an opportunity,
Yeah.
and it might be sort of taking the business. It would take the business away from what the businesses plan on doing over the next 2-3 years, but actually, you can see some sort of real benefits. It would be a long-term relationship with the right kind of client, that sort of thing, and that's more a C-level decision
Yeah.
that your typical CDO would be involved in making.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. And we've got loads of experience in some of the agencies we've been in. It's not easy to make that decision sometimes because you just need the
No.
fucking contract. You
Yeah,
need the income coming in.
yeah. And sometimes, I've been in businesses before where you just say, you win a contract, and I think, a lot of people weren't expecting to win the contract, so it wasn't really going to be a problem. The fact that you didn't have enough people or you didn't have all of the skills in house, and then suddenly the contract lands, and then bloody hell, you've got to do something about this. You know, Suddenly we need to recruit very quickly. We need to upskill very quickly,
Yeah.
but that's the risk that you took, and
Yeah.
you've got to sort of live with it, and it's now your responsibility to deliver against that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to kind of bring this stuff together, one of the reasons why it's important to say explicitly that the CDO sits and needs to look in both directions is it's quite common, I think, for delivery managers to sit heavily with the customer and to become the customer's advocate to the business and say, well, the customer's asked for this, we really ought to do it. But the trouble with that, of course, is you end up with this massive, or at risk of a massive over delivery problem, trying to give too much to be a really good supplier, and then crippling your business because you're just flat out and you're effectively you've undercharged for the amount you've delivered, and so you
Yeah,
have to be looking the other way as well and say, well, what's right for the business? Where do we, is this going to take us on the path we want to go, even if not all in one go? Is it at least is the trend in the right direction if we do this?
yeah. So
Cool.
one of the things that we haven't quite touched on yet, and it's quite a big one for me. I'm not sure I've got the answers, but I think it's worth just talking about, is that transition for a CDO from a medium-sized business to a large business. So it might be 250 plus. It makes a
Yeah.
large business, I think, something like that. And
Yeah.
I think when you go from a medium-sized business where you started working at that C level, you've got some teams below you, you it might be that you're with an organization that then becomes a large organization, or you decide as a CDO, I want to get into a large organization. I'm going to take this role with us. Um, you know, how feasible do you think it is for a CDO to make that step or that leap, I think is more accurate
Yeah, yeah,
into such a large organization, because it's you might continue in the role as it grows, but if there's an aggressive growth plan,
yeah,
have you got the skills and the experience to be
yeah,
able to manage it?
yeah.
Because that's a big old role, that mind, when you take that massive step up.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And in my chats with CEOs recently, I think they would say exactly the same thing, that they've wanted to have their delivery director grow with the role as the business has grown, because they're good people. They basically, that's what all good people want to see, are friends and colleagues growing, maturing. But I think, and certainly in my experience, being in multiple businesses at multiple different stages is really, really healthy as someone in this position themselves. It's really good to see others doing it. I learnt loads from working with you, Steve. I learnt masses observing, other delivery principles in other roles and projects that I was working alongside, and so on. And that learning from somebody else is brilliant. It also means that when you move positions, you get a chance to start that slate again, and you're not dealing necessarily with the history that you've brought along yourself
Yeah.
by ballsing things up along the way. But the key thing is that in those CEO conversations, several of them said effectively the person that you need in a small business is not the person you need in a medium business, is not the person you need in a large business, and is not the person you need in a very large business. It's a different person you need along the way. Now, that's not to say the same human being can't grow into that person, as it were, but the skills and qualities and capabilities needed at each of those different stages that we've been talking about are so distinct. And we'll talk about this in the weeks to come, definitely, because I think it's a really important discussion. Is so different that sometimes it's worth, as someone in a career path, to move around a bit and get those different experiences. And certainly for someone owning and running the business, it's worth considering: do we need to hire rather than just promote? Do we need to find someone who's at that position up there, and hire someone specifically with the skills that you need to do it?
Yeah, you're dealing with shareholders at these bigger organizations as well, and and politics as well. Politics always starts to come into play the bigger the organization gets as well. And that, you look at a small CDO compared to a large organization CDO, there's a huge gulf between those two. So yeah, I can understand why somebody might not be taken on the journey as a company moves
Yeah,
from a medium to a
yeah,
large, because
yeah,
it's a potentially it's a completely different role.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Right, Steve, I think it's probably time for us to wrap things up. So just to review what we covered today, we've talked initially about, what the podcast is about, what our aim is for it. But we spoke in more detail about the oddness of the CDO title, Chief Delivery Officer. Why are we using that funny title rather than any of the many other ones? The importance of the title, why it needs to be a C-level position rather than someone who reports to someone at a C-level position. And then in the second half, we talked in more detail about the role itself, the kind of thing it covers, that you're looking at customer needs plus the business objectives. You're talking about the CDO delivering things amongst their peers in that executive team with all the other specialisms. Everybody's working on delivering things for clients together, facilitating it close at hand or at a larger distance, but we're all doing it together. And we talked about the different skills you need in small, medium, and large businesses and how different it is. I think that was a really rather fantastic conversation. I'm looking forward to loads more of this.
Yeah, episode 1. I'm quite happy with that.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for listening along if you've got this far. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found lots from it. You can find out more at deliverthatpodcast.com. You can hear the trailer, you can hear the kind of aims of this, and there's also a form on the page where you can write questions in, comments if you want to talk to us. And we'll see you for episode 2.
See you in episode 2.
Cheers, Steve.
Cheers, Joe.